I think I am slowly going to start. People are going to keep joining, but at least they will know that they are in the right place. Our panelists, can you hear me clearly?
Yep. Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I welcome everybody who joined our call today. My name is Gabor Holch, and I'm going to introduce myself in a little bit more detail in a minute, but I am going to be the one who is hosting this discussion today with 3 panelists and now a growing number of participants. We have about 40 registrations and close to 2/3 are on the call right now. Now, before I jump into anything else, I would just like to give a quick overview of the technical way of hosting this event, because we are talking to each other on Zoom, and exactly at the time where I would ask everybody to silence their phones, I am going to silence everybody who enters the room. So everybody except for the 3 panelists and myself will have the mic off at the beginning, at the moment. Please also keep your camera off for bandwidth issues. But later on, about halfway through the event, we are going to open mics. And if you ask a question, then it's up to you if we hear you, we see you, or we just see your question in the type box, in the chat box. So for the moment, we are going to keep the focus on the discussion at the beginning. We are going to spend about an hour and a half together with each other. And I really very much look forward to what we are going to hear today. So, as I said, my name is Gabor Holch. I'm normally Shanghai based, but today I'm talking to you from Budapest, Hungary, and waiting to be able to return to Shanghai. But all the 4 of us, including our 3 panelists, are normally Shanghai based. The 3 of them are in Shanghai right now. And the first thing that we wanted to clarify is what is it that we want to do here? Because we are in the midst of a pandemic, which makes it impossible to know what is going to happen to us in the short run. It's a strange situation, isn't it? So we don't claim to be able to tell how this new normal that everybody is talking about will exactly work, and how it will look and how it will feel for foreigners based in China. And we don't even claim to make exact predictions, but it is our job to help our clients to bring some kind of predictability in a general picture of unpredictability. We cannot control the virus, at least individually as business people. We cannot control the environment, but we can control what we do about it and how we look after the teams that we work together with each other. So this is going to be our focus. What is it that we can do to bring more predictability, and how we prepare ourselves for an imminent new normal after the COVID-19 situation abates at least a little bit. The other clarification I want to bring today is what kind of foreigners in China are our focus today. So if you follow my work, then you know that expats in China, past, present, and future, are a little bit of a fixed obsession for me. And this is what we are also going to talk about, but our focus is going to be on people who are in China for business reasons. So people who are either employed by an international company, dependents of people who are employed by an international company, to some extent entrepreneurs like myself, although I would say that is our secondary focus. But we are not going to include foreigners who are in China and who live their lives there just like everybody else, but let's say they are in education, they teach in a school, or they are nurses, they are doctors, they are artists, because most of us are dealing with business people most of the time. So what is coming to us from the logistical point of view, from the legal point of view, from the mental point of view, and from the point of view that I will bring as well, which is leadership behaviors who are working with each other. So I would like to introduce our speakers just very briefly, and then they are going to introduce themselves as in much detail as they want to. So first, we welcome Arie Schreier, who is the general manager of the PTL Group, and his focus in this event is going to be logistical issues and also incorporating and running companies successfully in China. Then we have Zachi Lichtblau, who is the partner of Bonnard Lawson law firm, also in Shanghai, and David Ammerschlaeger, who is the head of psychology at the Shanghai ChinghHo Clinic. All of us are Shanghai-based. All of us focus on doing business with China from an international perspective. And the first question that I would like to ask all of them is, from your perspective in your industry, what kind of new normal are we expecting? And I think we suspect that we are not going back to exactly the same reality as we experienced before the COVID-19, but we are going to approach something that will be normalcy, whether if it's very different or just somewhat different from what we experienced before. So I would like to ask Arie first, then Zach second, and David third. What do you do exactly? How does your profession connect you to a coming new normal? And what do you expect to see when we are again allowed to travel back and forth from China, businesses start reviving, and hopefully we can make opportunities, but also we are going to face challenges. Arie, what do you think?
Okay, so thank you, Gabor, for the introduction. So I've been living and working in China for 17 years, 15 of them in Shanghai and in Beijing. I'm working for PTL Group that has been providing services to companies for the past 20 years. And currently we have 120 foreign clients that we are helping on various areas of logistics, finance, HR, manufacturing, and so on. So my prediction is based on what I see from the pool of clients that we have. If I may, I could divide them into three major groups. And this is what we see for the past few months with our clients. So there are a few clients that this crisis is actually going to kill them. It's going to kill the business in China and probably kill the business overseas as well. And we saw some of them starting to get in difficult situation in China, which they could survive for the first 2 months. And then when the headquarters got into trouble, they're looking at closing down a company, both first in China. This is the first step. And we've already been approached of some companies that they think that they need to shut down the company in China. And I think that these companies are panicking and maybe they don't see any future for their business in China and maybe not even in other places as well. So this is the minority. Very few companies feel that this is the end of the road for them in China, maybe other places as well. For a few companies, the coronavirus actually created opportunities. And few of the clients and the people that I know are actually doing very well during this pandemic, whether they're doing anything related to medical. Of course, any company that is dealing with medical equipment, masks, and so on have a great opportunity. But I think for the future, any technology that is related to medical will have an opportunity and will have a lot of encouragement from the local government to develop and enter into the Chinese market. So there's a small group of companies that are doing very well, and this crisis actually helped them to develop their business dramatically during this period. But for the majority of our clients, I can see that obviously the beginning of the crisis, let's say February, March, was a dip in the business, and they had to suffer a major slowdown. But I must say that every Q1 for all of our clients normally is a very quiet quarter. And so this year was even more quiet than normal. So it was maybe dead for some companies. But already in Q2, we see for the majority of our clients that are actually coming back, that there's some orders coming in, there's shipment coming in, salespeople are bringing orders. So there is still a hunger for some of the products. So for the good clients, for the good companies, they do have something to offer to the Chinese market. I think that the business will pick up, and it's just a matter of time that they will recover. And maybe this crisis will clean out the small and the weak clients, and maybe some of the companies will get rid of their competitors, and they'll become stronger and bigger and take a bigger market share. At the same time, we're facing a logistics issue where a lot of our clients have orders, but they cannot bring their products into China because there's no flights, there's no planes, there's no ships, ports are not working completely. So there's some logistic issues that it's hard to bring the product into China. But I believe that for a lot of the companies who will survive, and I think that most of the companies are now going into a survival mode, and survival mode means trying to save money as much as possible, reducing the cost of the operation in China. We can discuss later a few measures that they can take. But basically the ones who will shrink down, become more efficient, and cross this crisis, I think they'll come out of this crisis stronger and will have a better opportunity in the China market. I will stop here. We can elaborate later on, and I will let Zachi talk about some other points.
Thank you very much. This was a very good cross-section of the different approaches that, or different situations that companies find themselves in, and the different approaches that they could take. Yeah, Zach, how does this look from the legal perspective?
Yeah, so I'll explain a little bit about our practice and how we got exposed to the effects of the virus when it first hit. I've been in Shanghai for the past 15 years, and I'm a partner in Bonnard Lawson, which is an international law firm of Swiss origin, but our emphasis in Shanghai is very international. Our clientele is mainly from European countries, also from Israel, and from a few other countries around the world. And our focus is to provide international business clients a full package of legal support when they're in China. All of our clients are international. We hardly have any Chinese clients, and if we do, it's usually Chinese clients that go overseas. So the focus of my practice is about giving legal support within the Chinese legal environment. And I was actually in New York just before Chinese New Year, and I arrived a day before Chinese New Year, basically when we could say that the virus was proclaimed in China, and the streets became empty. And the first reactions that I got from clients was, so we understand we can pretty much write off the first quarter, or what do we do now? When do our people get back from holiday after Chinese New Year? There was a lot of scramble to get information as to what are the policies. And I have to say that the immediate things were relatively easy to find out. And relatively shortly, there were also policies that the government put in place to address certain concerns of companies in China. Later on, it was also clarified that this applies equally to Chinese domestic invested companies as well as foreign invested companies. And this is part of an ongoing trend in which policy is very clearly being stated to apply to both types of companies, maybe under the influence of the foreign investment law, which in itself is an influence of the trade war with the US. But we've seen one of the things that was remarkable, I think, from our perspective, because part of the support that we give clients is in labor law issues. And we've seen for the first time a more flexible position from the Chinese government, a more what you would almost characterize as pro-employer approach, because of an understanding that if you simply put all the pressure on the employers to keep everybody employed and to pay salaries, which they are supposed to do still, by the way, that has not changed. If you don't give any flexibility, companies might collapse, and at the end you will get the opposite result of people being thrown to the street because their employer went bankrupt. So we have seen some policies. I mean, a lot of the policies were very declarative, and but there were a few policies that really touched the core of the problem. So the government endorses a negotiation between employers and employees on reduction of salaries and reduction of working hours as a way of helping companies get through this crisis. And we have one client who's in tourism, which, as you can imagine, really suffered greatly as a result of this. It was business tourism, so it's even more. And they actually had the local labor bureau on their side, helping them deal and helping them negotiate with their employees, or at least helping them persuade their employees to accept the compromises that they offered. So we thought that was really a sign of good handling of the crisis. We also saw some clients that were contemplating acquisitions, which evaporated as soon as the crisis hit. But on the other hand, some more long-term thinking clients, especially in the medical field, said, no, we're continuing with our projects, if it's an acquisition or if it's a greenfield project. And they still see a future, and they still feel that this is a temporary situation. So all in all, we of course, we're always trying to stay optimistic, but I think that there are reasons to be optimistic. In our industry, if you look at the legal industry, we usually is described as a recession-proof industry, because we either open up companies when times are good, or we close them down when times are bad. And closing down companies is usually more work than opening them up. So we can't really complain too much about business right now. But of course, as a human being, I usually prefer to work on more upbeat, hopeful projects of, with a future of setting up a business here in China. So I'll cede some time so that we can go more in the discussion format that you suggested.
Thank you very much, Zach. And obviously, we are coming back to many of these points, because we are giving a very good general picture about both opportunities and challenges, and we have to deal with both of them. Before I give the floor to David, I would like to explain why I think the psychological aspect is very important. China is becoming a central market in everything, basically. And obviously, business thrives on risk. If you look at profit, one way or another, it always goes back to risk-taking and making, turning risk into opportunity. But also there is the necessity for a certain level of predictability and self-confidence. Business people can only take calculated risks if they trust that they are doing the right thing. But this COVID-19 crisis has been like a crazy story with many twists. At the beginning, foreigners living in China, they thought China was the hazard. When they traveled internationally like I did, we thought that we have to, let's say, stay at home for a week or two when we come from China to protect the rest of the world. And then the story goes around. Now the virus is much worse outside of China than inside China. And David, you are involved in both the corporate and the mental health aspect of psychology. So I can only imagine how the situation shook the world of the people that you meet every day.
Yeah, thank you, Gabor. A little introduction about myself. So I am a clinical psychologist. I work at ChinghHo Clinic, where I'm heading the psychology department. And yes, I have also background in the corporate field, because I was working as a lawyer, a tax lawyer at Linklaters for a few years. And then I was doing business consulting. And then I was chief financial officer for L'Oreal, research and development, hair care, styling and coloration. And I have only joined the psychological field about 4 years ago. So yeah, I have a strong background in the corporate field, and I'm working actually with a large set of people, and the people working with me actually also do, of course, have their own specializations, but basically we do work with all kinds of public, whether that is people in companies, and especially in EAP programs, that is employment assistance programs, schools, parent issues, couple counseling, and we treat Chinese and foreigners alike. So in my client base, I have Chinese families and I have also foreign families. The point that you raise, Gabor, is very important actually on many levels. Yes, definitely, COVID has brought a lot of distress and a completely new situation on the mental health care side. But actually, it also brought a lot of surprises. A lot of people felt much better than ever actually in their lives because of the slowdown of society. A lot of people that I was working with who were actually in a burnout situation and in a depression or having some anxiety problems suddenly felt empowered by the situation because they could actually start to look at themselves. So I would say, I mean, without going into specific cases or situations, for everybody, there is like a binary consequence on COVID. For some people, it has been bringing them a lot of opportunities. And that is also on the, true on the family side. Some families have been striving because it brought the family bubble much stronger together, because they have been living together, experiencing that together. It's like hardship that really founds a stronger connection and a stronger sense of attachment to each other. The same for homeschooling. A lot of kids have been doing homeschooling. For some kids, it has been an amazing opportunity to learn in their own way. And this is something that in the future, a lot of educational psychologists and specialists will be looking into, because we have seen that basically the school system right now has issues in the way we are teaching children in a very industrial way, I would say. We are putting some knowledge inside of them like it's a machine, and they are supposed to learn at the same level and at the same speed. But actually, there's other different ways that we can do that by having a more individualized learning program, and online schooling or homeschooling is enabling that. So it has been a tremendous opportunity for some people, and it has been a catastrophe for other people. I have heard that divorce rates are growing. We have a lot of people coming to ask us for couple counseling because pre-existing issue in the family and in the couples have been set under a magnifying glass whenever you are under lockdown. So overall, to summarize the things, I would say it is COVID has been a factor that has been increasing pre-existing tendencies. And coming to the subject of our discussion, foreigners in China, I would say for me the evolution will be actually an acceleration of something that we already noticed before. I would look, for example, in the kind of foreigners we have and the kind of expatriates we have. We have seen that more and more companies, Chinese companies or multinational companies, are employing expats with expat contracts and so on. More and more, they are replacing expats by nationals, by Chinese nationals. So I think this has been accelerated by this COVID-19 situation. We will see less of those what I would nicely call the post-colonial expatriation, you know, like when you have a foreigner coming, trying to train and teach Chinese people how to do business, how to do this and that. So that's like a little bit the post-colonial side. And I don't think that is going to happen that much anymore. I mean, we are seeing less and less of those. I think the kind of expats we have will be more and more on a transnational cooperation side. It's human resource departments wanting to like do some exchange programs for a few months I've seen that, for example, when I was working at L'Oréal, we had Chinese people coming for 3 months or 6 months to Paris just to see how it's working, get familiar with the environment and the company culture, and then they go back to China. And it's the same that I'm seeing now in my client base when I treat foreigners. Very often they are only here for like 6 months or 1 year or something like that for a short-term assignment, either on a specific project or it's like a human resource-based exchange program. Just to finish maybe on the mental health side, it is absolutely huge how many expats experience psychological distress. And if you look at research and statistics, about 80 to 90% of people being in an expatriation situation experience distress that actually raises at clinical levels at a certain point of time, because the shock is so strong. I can come back to what is actually a psychological threat and how we define ourselves and what kind of issues they can arise. But the expatriation is a huge trauma actually to your psychology, and that is something that many expatriates experience at some point of time.
Thank you very much. Let me just throw up the next 2 questions and then introduce how we are going to take questions from the audience so that I give you a little bit of time to think about it. So I think what I see here and what I see in general when I talk to companies is the glass is still 3/4 full and just 1/4 empty. So obviously there is shock, there is trauma, there is disruption, but on the other hand, individuals and companies as well see a lot of opportunity. And this happens. I mean, some of us were already in China during the SARS outbreak. I was. And I remember that it was really like a fever. It was very uncomfortable to go through, but afterwards the recovery was a very rewarding experience. So here is what I would like to do in the next quarter hour or so. Let's focus on the bad side first. Let's focus on the hazards, on the risks, on the challenges. And I will ask all 3 of you, starting with David, then going to Arie, and finally asking Zach, if you could give one piece of advice to basically weather the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, and avoid the worst impact from the perspective of an international manager that manages a mixed team. Some of them are Chinese people, some of them are international people, starting with the individual, because the attitude matters on all levels. So what is one blunder or one kind of wrong attitude that can cause a lot of damage that you would recommend that people avoid? Then from the individual, which will be represented by David, we will go up on the company level and we will ask Arie, what is it that can help you not to become one of those companies that will be killed by the COVID-19 and have to be closed down? And finally, we'll go over, Zach, because you mentioned something very interesting, that this is even a learning opportunity for the Chinese government. So the way internationals and international businesses are interacting with the legal environment. So last, I will ask you about, maybe there is even a lesson here about how to work on the macro level with regulators, with government agencies, or maybe even the other way around. And then we are going to do another round and we are going to look at the same thing in the positives. What is the biggest opportunity, or to be more specific, what is it that each of us can carry through from this COVID-19 crisis and bring it into the new normal, so that we don't lose these precious lessons that each of you mentioned on the individual level, on the corporate level, or even on the macro level. While you are thinking about this, I would like to just address everybody who is visiting us today, that we will go on like this for another 20 minutes or so. And then after that, we will open for questions from everybody. Now, there are a couple of things you can do to make sure that your question gets addressed. And there are a couple of other things that you can do to make sure that your questions will not be addressed. If you don't want us to answer your questions, then make them extremely long, because our time is quite limited. So there are basically two ways to ask your questions. One of them is to type them into the chat module, which is in most editions of Zoom, it's down there. And the other one is to just give me a line in the chat module that you would like to ask a question through the microphone. But in both cases, please keep the questions short and make sure that they are really questions and not comments. I will monitor the chat module while our panelists are speaking, and I will make sure that we can address all questions. But another thing that I would like to ask our panelists to do is to type into the chat module addressed to everyone your preferred way of getting in touch with you. It can be an email address, it can be the link to your LinkedIn profile or whatever else it is, so that in case somebody wanted to address a question to you and they don't have the opportunity to do so during the event, then they can simply contact you afterwards. I'm sure that there are going to be people who would like to address you afterwards, because in a face-to-face event, they would just come over and ask you a question. Online is more difficult to do. If any of you ask a question, please make sure that you address the question to everyone in the chat module and not just to the panelists, because I will monitor the question and I want everybody to see them. So whenever you want, you can start typing your question. I will see them even while we are not open for questions yet. And now I would like to go to our glass half empty part and say, as a psychologist, as somebody who hears, I'm sure that he hears complaints and troubled stories every day, what could you advise us to do to avoid the worst and make sure that we can make use of the opportunities later on, David? Okay, we might have a disruption. David, are you with us?
Oh, I think we lost.
I'm with you. I don't know. Suddenly it's disconnected. Was that the only one?
You disappeared for a few seconds.
It happened to me earlier.
Okay. Good. I'm back. I can hear you. So sorry, Gabor, I didn't get your last few seconds, but I'm ready to answer your question.
Please.
So on an individual level, what I might say is, well, I will talk about psychology if you don't mind, but what exactly is happening when you are facing a tough situation like expatriation itself or a COVID-19 situation? I'm going back to identity psychology. So how do we define ourselves as individuals, and how do we define the world that that is around us? And that is actually true also from a collective social psychology point of view. This is also true for even a society and a company, basically. What defines us is the narrative that we tell ourselves about ourselves. If I ask you, Gabor, who are you? You will tell me all your story, like your parents, your education, what you did, your vacation, all stories that are in your memory shape who you are and how you define yourself as per the past that you have. Part of your identity is also the present experience that you have, like how you perceive the present, the here and now, your body emotions and feelings, the interpretation of things and the meaning that you give to things. And then last thing, the projection into the future, how you see yourself. There is an idealized self, but there's also an actual or real self, like what sounds more realistic, but actually what you would like to be. So whenever you have, this is a simplified model, but that's the basic model. Whenever you have a tough situation, there are what is called psychological threats. That means that these are things that actually endanger or question or challenge these things, your narrative, your projections, your perception of the present, everything. If, for example, you see, I don't know, you're a foreigner in China and you see people being suddenly very rude in the public transportation and you're not used to that, This is something that questions who you are, how you perceive yourself. If suddenly I don't know, there is pollution or cultural differences, you don't like Chinese food, you are used to a certain food and suddenly you cannot have the food that you're used to, this is a psychological threat somehow. COVID-19 is not different because it is also a psychological threat. You are used to have your usual routines in your everyday life. You have your habits. You're used to go up in the morning and see your colleagues and have a coffee break at 10 or something like that with these people. This is something that you cannot do. Psychological threat again. And you have to completely change your mindset and your habits and the way that you work. So this is just to describe a little bit what is happening. I hope it was clear, but this is a bit to explain what is happening. A manager, you were asking me, how can you manage a team or something like that? As a manager, you need to understand what people are used to. What are their needs? What are their fundamental needs? This person needs his, I'm not even talking about, every morning coffee, but this person needs to be recognized, to be acknowledged more than other people. Everybody needs to be acknowledged or recognized, but some people need it more than other people. This person needs to be reassured because he has a neurotic personality and therefore he is quite anxious about things. So this person needs to be more reassured and so on. This person has a negative or pessimistic mindset. So that person is always seeing everything in a gloom way. So you need to cheer this person up, bring in some optimistic and positive ideas and stuff like this. So for your team, it's important to know your guys and to empathize, to actually put yourself into their shoes and see what is their fundamental need right now. How can I help him to satisfy this need? Yeah, I can go on, but I want to give the floor to other people.
Thank you. There is one thought that I would like to circle back to later when we talk about opportunities, and therefore I will just throw it in now and we can return to it later. That in my experience as a leadership coach and as a manager myself, sometimes it's the most neurotic and most pessimistic people who are the high performers.
Yes.
Actually, the manager can look at how to turn that kind of backward-looking energy or negative energy into drive. Do you mind if we circle back to this later, or would you like to answer it now?
Well, I mean, the thing is that the overachievers are usually the most the people lacking self-confidence. They need to prove themselves. They need to show that they are there. They need to show that they can do it, that they are able. And so just I don't go too much into details, but yeah, definitely the people who work long hours, the people who prepare and over prepare everything and do slideshows with backups and everything perfectly, those people are usually anxious, neurotic, but not neurotic actually. There is conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is a personality trait that pushes you to be very exact and to be reassured by the anticipation that you actually really prepare and organize everything. And that is a personality trait that works very well in the corporate environment, because this is also the way that you can reassure your own manager. The manager is also very often an overachiever, so he's also an anxious person. I mean, in the hierarchy, these anxious types are quite well rewarded because they will try to back up everything and to make sure that we are getting where we want to be.
Okay, thank you very much. Arie, I would like to bring it over to not how people work, but what they actually do. When you said that obviously the COVID-19 crisis is going to kill some businesses and it's not going to kill some others. And if you give advice about how not to belong in the section that is going to be killed by the COVID-19 crisis, I would be very curious about what does it depend on whether a business is killed by not. Is it just simply which industry they are in? For example, if you are in tourism, event organization, then you are doomed. Is it how well the businesses are planned and how good their business model is? Is it about the people? Is it about the attitude? When you give advice about how to survive this crisis, which way do you usually go?
Right. So obviously there's some industries that the virus and this crisis just doesn't allow to exist. If we talk about tourism, if we talk about, we have a client who's doing medical conferences, so they just cannot do this, not in China and not anywhere around the world right now. So certain businesses just cannot exist at this time. So there's not much we can do to help these businesses. The risk that I see are for different kind of businesses, and this is to take David's points and link the individual aspect and the corporate. And I want to discuss a little bit about the management style. A lot of the foreign companies in China were managed by expats. That a lot of them are now actually got stuck outside of China. Now, for some of them that were very centralistic managers, and a lot of the business was dependent on them, and they were very much controlling of the business and checking everything. Now, when they're overseas and they cannot control the business on a day-to-day basis, things can fall apart, and it really depends on the way that they structure the control mechanism, the supervision, the ability to control from far away. And I fear that a lot of the businesses are just going to lose control, and the employees will feel that they are lacking guidance and training, and they will just fall apart just because the business is not going to function well. At the same time, what these managers can do is either find solutions to manage the business from far away, either to implement some IT systems or use a third party to outsource some of the function of the company to a trusted third party. And I think it's very important because the business has to survive and not depend on the foreign manager. And many of the businesses that I see are too much dependent on one person, and once you take this person out, the business is falling apart. I was out of China for 2 months during the virus, and when I came back, went into quarantine. I'm actually still in quarantine. So all in all, I've been away from my office for 3 months, and I'm sure that none of my clients actually noticed that I wasn't at the office because the team that we have about 60 people working and providing the service. They're not dependent on me, and they do their work regardless if I'm in the office or if I'm at home, if I'm overseas. And I think this is a very important point. A lot of the businesses now have to learn how to work from far away, and the strength and the relationship that they have with their employees and the trust and the ability to delegate responsibility to the local employees will determine whether the business will survive or not. Of course, there are many other aspects, logistic aspects, financial aspects, and whether they have the right product and with the right industry. But this is obviously a mutual aspect of the business, which obviously needs to fall into place. But I think that the control of the business and monitoring, keeping the business together is very important now, because no matter how good is your product, if you don't have the team to take it forward, even if you're not in China, and a lot of my friends, they cannot go back, and actually a lot of them said, you know what, I'm not going to go back, even if I can, I'd rather manage my business from far away. And it's not really easy to manage every business from far away if you didn't set up the mechanism to operate from remotely.
Thank you very much. I see a connection there that we can circle back to later between something that David said before, the kind of foreigners who are in China, also the localization trends, and what you said just now. So maybe we can highlight this later about what we are learning from this crisis and what we want to keep from it. But now I would like to go over to Zach, because I think the legal aspect can be the most ruthless. If we make a mistake, we can be punished severely, and law penetrates every aspect of business. So what, during this COVID-19 crisis, what have been the real legal company killers, and how do you help your clients to avoid them? What kind of advice can you give people who are on our call?
Well, I think that I'll circle back a little bit to a question that you asked in the beginning of this set, and in the sense of this is a testing time or this is a learning time for governments. And I think that it is a learning time and a testing time for governments and for businesses alike. And like Arie mentioned, there's businesses that can manage themselves remotely more easily, have a bigger chance to survive. Businesses that are less dependent on presence somewhere have a chance to survive. And at the other end, businesses that are just in the wrong business for this kind of pandemic, no matter what they do, they might have problems surviving. Now, what governments are doing, and I think the different governments are dealing with this differently around the world, is to try to see how we can save companies for the morning after, how we can save our economy for the day after COVID-19, whenever that happens. And it's tricky and it's challenging. And it's, I mean, governments are also tested now how they react to the medical emergency, but they're not, the test is not going to end with the medical emergency. The test is going to continue as how they are going to deal with the economic side of things. And giving companies the right tools to maintain themselves is a big issue. And we've seen that some countries are better built to support businesses during these times than others. And in this sense, I would actually put both European economies and China on roughly the same page as not being too shy about supporting your businesses and making sure that employees are protected as much as possible. Whereas I think on the American side, it's much more difficult because it's always been more of a laissez-faire kind of situation, which the market, the sanctity of the market was stronger. And in these kind of situations, this is exactly when you need government. This is exactly when you need the government to step in and help. So I think it's a huge challenge for governments. It's a huge challenge for companies, and their interaction is going to be very interesting if you're watching this from the sideline, but I think none of us are really just watching it from the sideline. So I think it will be life-changing for many companies and for many individuals.
Thank you very much. I will soon ask my last question, and after that we are going into discussion mode because a couple of questions are coming in already. But before that, I would also like to just put in my 20 cents from the leadership coaching, leadership consulting angle. What I heard from you is extremely important because David said that during a time like this, we redefine our identity. And indeed, companies are trying to do this as well. In my experience, the most important thing is for companies to find a balance between sticking to a blueprint that doesn't work anymore because everything is changing around us, and re-engineering ourselves, or at least trying to re-engineer ourselves completely during a crisis time, which is not the best time to rethink everything. So obviously, if we take an example that Arie said, a company that was in the field of medical conferences. Now, obviously, that business is extremely vulnerable to the COVID-19 crisis, but even companies like this can look at how they can fulfill their original goal, their original mission, without throwing medical conferences. For example, I was supposed to come to Europe at the beginning of March to participate in a big HR conference in Barcelona, which finally didn't happen. I got stuck here in Budapest, but the organizing company of this conference engages us in a very interesting way, because obviously they have the data of thousands of speakers and thousands of participants. And they simply brought this whole community online, and they are doing something very interesting about it. I think this is a positive example. On the other hand, there are a lot of companies that say, all right, we just press the pause button now, and we are going to do something completely different, because the COVID-19 crisis just reinterprets everything that we do. And perhaps there is not enough clarity during this time to do long-term plans based on the new reality. So the last question that I would like to ask you is that in your respective fields, and anybody can go first, is what is it that people are realizing, people are picking up, or even developing new ways of running their business, which you hope, or you think it would be beneficial to carry over to the new normal after the COVID-19 crisis? I hope that my question is clear enough. I wonder if any of you would like to share first.
I think a lot of the businesses, they need to adopt the way that they operate, the way that they even sell. Salespeople cannot travel, so they have to find other ways to contact their contact people. But even some of our clients, they have to change their business model. Just in your example, we have clients that are they had to do training, and they cannot do training in classes anymore, so they have to develop their online training very fast. We had clients that tried to bring in all sorts of softwares to train children in different extracurricular activity, and they didn't succeed very well. But actually, during the crisis, suddenly everybody was looking for some of these softwares to occupy the kids. So there are a lot of opportunities for companies who will be quick enough to adopt their business model to work remotely, to work to connect with their market in different ways than before, or even change the business model altogether to find something different to do to the needs of the people who are sitting at home at the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can continue on that. I totally agree. Actually, there's a very interesting question that we might ask ourselves. It's the importance of the impact of this whole crisis. Is it a switch of paradigm where we really go towards a scenario where we look at a global reshaping of the way that we do business, we live, we work? I mean, things have been put massively online, just as you said, Gabor, and Arie said a bit something similar about the conferences that go online, children being schooled from home, people working from home. So basically, if we look at the potentialities this has for society at large and the way that we see work, in the end, nowadays we could run businesses from afar. Expatriation would actually maybe not even make sense anymore, because we could actually technically have somebody working in a company in China but being based in New York. Technically it's possible. So this crisis has shown that there is much more that we can do online than we thought possible. Basic and even digital services. Digital services are very much developed in China, but not so much in Europe or North America. I think this will boost the industry as well in the future to see how much is actually possible through online. And maybe this will even be boosted even more if we have the 5G technology arriving at some point. Anyway, so on the other side, maybe this is all just like a big thing, looks like a big thing, and suddenly, boom, it will collapse and implode at some point, because somehow people did not get, did not make the change, and were not able to adapt and to make it sustainable over time. It's also exactly what Zach said, about how much can governments and organizations as such learn from that and take the best out of it in terms of legal laws, but also in terms of internal organization. You can reshape your whole anyway, Arie is a logistic expert, but I guess that logistic streams can be changed after this crisis in major ways, because we have seen how much we are interdependent, but also how much we are dependent on China. So I have seen that many companies are rethinking the way they do their supply chain, sourcing less and less from China, but trying to multiply the sourcing feeds. So anyway, the question is, how big is that going to impact the future? We have even seen that suddenly nature is thriving again. You know, we have seen animals coming back to cities. Geologists are super happy because suddenly the earth is talking to them again. We don't have the roar of cars and industries running and making all these parasite noise. Suddenly they are able to understand and study the earth as it was never possible before, because we didn't have the technology, and now we have the technology, but suddenly it's silent. So I wonder, I mean, nobody has the answer, right? But how much really we are going to be able to take out of this. And on the other side, when we talk about this implosion, I'm a little bit afraid that because of the psychological response, maybe the fear, the anxiety, the whole frustration that people are experiencing, they try to find a scapegoat, something to blame for the crisis, and that is necessarily other nations. It's other groups, you know. Maybe I will just finish on that one. The way that actually trauma works, because there's a big thing that is happening collectively and individually, that is psychological trauma. And trauma happens whenever you have a hardship, but especially that you're not able to explain it. It's like, sorry to talk about something like that, but typically when you have undergone some violence, domestic violence or violence as a kid, basically the child is not able to explain why he has been suffering this violence, and therefore it becomes a trauma. Now, we always try to explain things. Our mind is switched in this way that we try to rationalize and to make some sort of explanation for that. And this is how we go into this blaming game, because we are suffering, we are experiencing hardship, whatever that is, economically, sociological, psychologically, and we try to rationalize it. And, oh, it's because of the Chinese, oh, it's because of the Americans, it's because of the government, it's because of whatever, you know. So I'm afraid that this blaming game will suddenly bring, make the whole potentialities implode. Okay, now shut up.
This is fantastic, because we are steadily progressing towards one question that we got from one of our participants. But before we go there, I would still like to ask Zach, so in the legal field or in the field where you are working, what is it that we are developing now and we can carry through to the new normal, please?
Yeah, so again, I see our business kind of looking both on the business side and on the government side in terms of what governments are saying. And I think that basically on the business.
That's sad, because it sounded super interesting what you was just
sharing.
And it
did, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to circle back again. What I would like to do is I would like to ask this question, and then when we reestablish the connection with Zach, then I would like to ask him to repeat what we didn't hear. So the question from Hadas was, I hear from some foreigners that living in China that recently they face more racism. Do you feel that? And how do you think it will affect work relationships with companies, with Chinese employees? Now, I think racism itself is the mental, psychological aspect of this problem, but we can look at the same issue from different angles. For example, everybody, because of this COVID-19 crisis, everybody brings everything online. And obviously, China is a leader in many of the applications that we use or could use to work remotely. But on the other hand, there is also a division between China and the rest of the world in terms of internet connectivity. A lot of the tools developed in China are not widespread or not available abroad, and a big chunk of the World Wide Web is not available in China. So I would rephrase Hadas's question and ask everybody, do you think this COVID-19 as a trend drives a wedge between foreigners and Chinese people living in China from the technological, from the legal, from the psychological point of view? Or do you see the opposite? And do you see that, like crises very often do, it can bring people closer together? Because after all, if you took even a group of random strangers and you lock them down in a situation like this, they are going to learn about each other, and they are going to establish relationships that they didn't have before. So we can go logistical, legal, psychological, technological, regardless of your special field. How would you approach this? What is your experience in recent months in China?
Sorry, I'm back now. I have no idea what I'm...
Zach.
We are in the middle of our next question, and I would like to go back to what we didn't hear, that you said. Is that okay? Can you give us a few minutes?
Sure. Yeah. So to go back to what I was talking about?
Yes, we will want to hear what you said, but in the meantime, we went on to the question, is the current crisis bringing the international community in China and local people closer to each other, or a little bit farther from each other?
Yes, and unfortunately, I would probably say the latter, but I think it's more of a global phenomenon. It does depend on the people, of course, and some people would be tolerant no matter what, and some people would be xenophobic no matter what. But I think definitely a crisis like this could be a boost for xenophobia, and it also depends on how it's being played by politicians in different countries around the world. I think the more that Chinese people feel under siege, as if they're being blamed for the crisis, then the more that some people would throw it back at you and say like, no, actually it's the foreigners' fault. I remember also during SARS, it kind of felt that way sometimes, that there were even cartoons showing how a proper person should behave during the epidemic, and all the people that behaved properly had Chinese features, and the ones that were doing what you're not supposed to do for some reason had foreign features. And I don't even think it was a conscious type of racism or xenophobia. And I also don't want to say that this is a Chinese phenomenon. I think it's a world phenomenon. It's a human phenomenon. I think that a lot of Chinese, and I'm married to a Chinese woman, and we have Chinese relatives in other countries, and they're subject to racism in other places. So it's unfortunately crisis is the best in people, and then part of the worst in people. Unfortunately, we're seeing that worldwide.
So it does happen, but it's not specifically a China issue, that the kind of fear and pressure that we experience, it brings the worst out of everybody. Arie, David?
Yeah, I can answer a little bit. The thing is, for me, there's two main things. First, xenophobia and racism is a coping mechanism somehow to a certain fear. Well, there's one thing on the other, on one side, it depends on your value system, on your belief system, and what we call in psychology the schematas that you found your cognitive processes on. That means that basically, if you think that all foreigners smell bad, or all whatever, African people have bad hygiene, all these stereotypes that people basically have in the subconscious. It sometimes it's very subconscious. I have met people who tell me, oh, I'm so open-minded, I'm so totally not racist. But actually, if you start talking to them, they have a lot of stereotypes And it would tell you, oh no, stereotypes, they're not racist. It's just like how they are, you know. American people, they are like this. French people are like that, and so on. And that is super dangerous, because that is stereotypes and schemata, basically, the conception of how these people are, basically. So you put people in a certain box. And whenever you have a fear situation, an anxiety situation, you suddenly, as I said, you try to explain certain things. And then you say, oh, it's because of Chinese, because Chinese, they eat just bad food anyway, you know, and these wet markets that are horrible, blah, 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 blah. So that's the American point of view, where they think that anyway, if something like that happens, it has to be in China because so on, so on. So basically, racism is using these preconceptions that we have about the general people, whatever, to actually cope with our fear, to cope with all the anxiety or the specific issues that we are facing. And we have seen that historically, you know, happening already in other crises. In Germany, I'm French and German, so in Germany it happened during the Nazi time, blaming the Jews, because the Jews suddenly became the scapegoat for the defeat in the First World War, and so suddenly they came, they were pursued and stuff like this. But it's you have many different historical situations where you have a certain specific population being targeted for that. And unfortunately, that is happening worldwide. Chinese people in America are being targeted, and foreigners sometimes are being targeted in China as well. I would say, unfortunately, that kind of situation is to be expected whenever there is anxiety, frustration, hardship in a group of people.
Thank you. Arie, you obviously look at this from the mobility perspective, the mobility of people, of businesses, of money, investment, goods, and so on. How do you see it? Obviously now, right now, we have stopped the flow of a lot of things that are potential hazard in terms of viruses. But in the longer term, where do you see the COVID-19 crisis taking us in terms of the exposure of China and the rest of the world?
I think, like any of these crises, we look back at the SARS. After the SARS, maybe 6 months or maybe 1 year later, things got back to normal in terms of the business. And I think the market forces will eventually determine the business flow and where the opportunities are, this where people will come to do the business. I think the COVID-19 will have a deeper impact because it will take a lot longer for people to travel back to China, or for people to travel all over altogether. And this way, as we discussed before, we need to change the way we do business with each other. But I think as a whole, looking at the China market, there's no doubt that the money is here, the opportunities are here, the government incentives are incredible. And I have actually in my office one person that every day she reads the new announcement by the government, and every day they publish something new, something, it's old news that we've been mentioned again, but every day there's some news about some incentive or some encouragement or some tax reduction, and every day I learn something new. And it seems like there's a huge force trying to bring the business to normal again, and attract foreign investment and bring the local market to normal consumption again. So I think that this enormous force will bring back to normal, to some sort of normality. It may take another year and maybe 2 years, but in 2 years' time, we look back and think, we'll talk about the COVID-19 just like we talk about the SARS, because the business will go on and the people who are running the businesses will come back. And it's just a matter of, we need some time to recover from this trauma. And it's a big trauma for a lot of us. But the business will take us where the money is. And I think that China is still a very leading force in the world economy.
I very much agree with that. And to be honest, just watching the news and being locked down in Shanghai in January, February, then being locked down in Europe in March and April, I am absolutely impressed how calmly and with what kind of self-discipline modern humanity is taking this crisis. I'm actually feel a little bit proud of the way we organized our world. And obviously China has taken a leading role in creating the blueprint that the rest of the world is following. And there is absolutely no doubt in anybody's mind that China is going to be one of the central players in economic sense in the next couple of decades. So one thing that people in business have to think about is how to survive in this market, because there are many dynamics all around. China is growing. 1.5 billion people, when they set their mind to something, they're usually going to achieve it. On the other hand, business is being localized, as David called attention to. So I think one of the things that is going to be redefined these days is the role of foreigners in Chinese market. But before we go there and close down, I would like to circle back to Zach, because we really want to survive in the Chinese market. Law is a very important thing to help us do that. And we didn't hear what you said in answer to the previous question. So would you like to summarize to us what is it that we didn't hear?
Yeah, so I said, first of all, I see our job to be on the intersection of both the corporate side and the government side, to see how these interact. And I said on the corporate side, I defined two types of winners or survivors for this kind of crisis. And I would say to any type of crisis. One group is the flexible group, the people that know how to change their business to so-called move with their cheese no matter what happens. And like those alcohol manufacturers that change into making hand sanitizers, or those textile companies that start making masks, or those car companies that make ventilators. And then on the other hand, those are the ones that are, you could call them the accidental winners, or ones that basically their type of business, their business model is just very suited to this particular type of crisis. And I put, for example, the online retailers in that group. And I mentioned that Taobao had its start after SARS, big jump at that time. And the whole idea of buying online started at that time because it was a very convenient way to move product. Now, of course, I call this accidental because it's just suited to this type of crisis. If the crisis was an earthquake or loss of electricity, then it would be the other way around. This online retailers, of course, would not have the advantage, would even have a disadvantage. The other side is the test for governments and what they do and how they make sure that businesses survive or not survive. And governments need to look at the economy on the whole, and they need to look at how both companies, but more than that, individuals manage to survive. And of course, if big companies collapse, that has a lot of effect on individuals, but also if an entire cross-section of small businesses collapse, that has an influence on a lot of individuals. And there we see in the world that different governments develop different approaches, but at the end of the day, they know that they need to deliver, because you could see that this really affects the way that they're being judged by their people. And I hear from some people who say, well, you live in China, what does it really matter for the government, how it's looked? I say in China probably more than in other places. It's very important for the government how it's being viewed by the people. Because the fact that there's no election doesn't mean that there's no legitimacy to the government given by the people. And I think that that's true in every type of society. Now, I think that in a way, a crisis as deep as this one really exposes leaders that are more populist and cannot deliver. They just try to find other people to blame. And they would probably be exposed by this kind of crisis. It would be very interesting to see how this would develop in the political arena whether they would pay the price. And on the other hand, the same type of political leaders are also the ones that are more likely to go for the scapegoating option, because it will reflect the problem from their own problems, from their own inadequacies.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions that I would like to run through because in a way we implicitly answered them already. So there was a question from Gordon whether we expect this crisis to play out in something like, as he says, continued impressive growth or Japanese-style stagnation or major economic and political crisis. But I can hear that you are fairly optimistic. And some of you even mentioned that we are going to remember this COVID-19 as we do SARS or the 2008 financial crisis. That's the way I also saw it. I mean, I have gone through a couple of cataclysms from the change of the political system in Eastern Europe when I was 18, SARS in China, financial crisis. I was already traveling quite extensively. Something bothersome in our psyche always warns us of the end of the world. But on the other hand, eventually, if we look into the future and then we look back again, we just see it as a, how do you say, as a collection of stories that helped us to get where we are now. So I don't think we have to look at it separately. There was another question from, yes, please.
Yeah, just one small reaction. Something that I noticed in this crisis is, I think, this is my personal opinion, but I would say the majorly nefarious influence of social media and the overload of information that we have been feeding into people. I would say there is a fundamental issue about the media itself, how it is perceived by people. Most people think that it's an information channel, that they are getting educated or that they are getting real life information, useful information, or something, like that. And in the end, they're just getting triggered in their anxiety, in their emotions, in their frustrations, in everything. So when you said, Gabor, how calmly people react, I'm not 100, I don't agree 100% with you, because if you look at other epidemics before, I'm thinking, for example, in the 1968 epidemics, or the 1957 epidemic, which actually cost more people their lives than this COVID-19 epidemic. It was a pandemic. In 1957, 1968, there were several million of people dying from what is actually an earlier form of the avian flu. But at that time, nobody was talking about it because the media coverage was very low. Governments were actually keeping it shut. And there was no social media to alarm people, and everybody has comments nowadays. Everybody has something to say about everything and so on. So this multiplication of fear and comments is building up in everybody's minds. And I would say, actually, in this crisis, I'm actually impressed by the opposite than you, how hysterical people have become because of this. I'm not mindering the impact and the seriousness of the pandemic, but still, compared to other crises and other major health threats that we have been seeing in the past, it's like an overexplosion. And I don't want to blame something specifically, but I'm seeing the huge role of social media and of the media in general in this crisis.
I must agree with what you're saying. So I would like to distinguish the two things. It seems that we have acted responsibly, but we have communicated irresponsibly. I perfectly agree with you about the part. So what impresses me is how disciplined people were and staying at home, reminding each other, going out to the balcony, clapping for the medical workers and so on. But when I look at social media, that I perfectly agree with you about the scary part of it, because it's all emotional. Even when Narendra Modi or Donald Trump who are national leaders go on social media, even we see their even there we see their emotional sides, and perhaps I don't know, we could take it farther about the role of the social media.
We could take it farther to the role of media, who is actually playing on emotions to entertain people. Media has ceased to become this purely information and education channel. It has become a form of entertainment. And people want to be entertained through emotions, through stories, through something powerful. And that's what media is giving us, by giving us drama, death, and all these negative influences.
Exactly. And even if you're an individual user, you only get attention if you're extreme. And perhaps that gives the power. Somebody asked us about the blame narrative of blaming China. I think if you look at it rationally, blaming the mass movement of blaming China, so to speak, it takes us back to a mythical age where we cannot imagine that something bad that happens to us is not caused by some power that is apart from us. It doesn't. It's not somebody's fault. And then you can see it taken to quite extreme. Obviously, there are different repercussions and different aspects of this. And one of the good questions would be, if you are responsible for a team, at what point do you stop this kind of communication in your organization? Perhaps the other panelists have experiences about this.
I haven't. I'm sorry.
Please.
In terms of having experience in stopping that kind of communication within your organization?
Well, it's quite interesting to me because, for example, I'm talking to you from Hungary, where during the COVID-19, there was a new law passed that spreading false rumors is punished much more strictly than it was before. And obviously, on the very social media where these rumors are spreading, there was a huge debate about basically comparing the attitude to social media content in the People's Republic of China and in the European Union. And people started asking questions, and the opinions are very much split. And some people are saying, yes, these are special times, so you have to stop rumors exactly the way you stop people from stealing medical masks from clinics. And other people obviously had other considerations with the freedom of speech, with the freedom of association, and so on. So I wonder, for example, if you run an international organization, a company, or a similar organization in China, have you met the legal side of?
Well, that law is already on the books in China for a long time before COVID-19. So in terms of and it's been criticized because, I mean, it's been criticized mainly outside of China because it seems to stifle free speech, which is not really something that is that much advocated in China to begin with. So the dangers of rumors, I think from a Chinese perspective, is that rumors lead to instability. Instability is something you want to avoid under all circumstances. But even that has been somewhat criticized in China because of that doctor from Wuhan that was basically a whistleblower, because he was being basically accused for starting rumors, even though the rumors were true. So there's a double-edged sword. I mean, if you want to silence rumors, how do you silence rumors that are true? What do you do when you do that? You basically silence the truth in the name of, of just having harmony in a society, where harmony is not always the most important value. If disharmony is coming straight at you very, very quickly, and that little disharmonious sign you're hearing is basically an alarm bell that says, get out of the way, because it's going to be very, very difficult.
I would like to finish with a question or a rephrasing of the question that Jurian asked us here. The question is, can China continue the elimination approach, meaning trying to minimize risk, given the dire consequences for the economy and what ensuing impediments mean for expatriates in China? But I would like to rephrase the question because it already has some presuppositions in it. Do you think that the current approach that we can experience in China, not just from the government, but also from our Chinese business partners and companies and so on, do you think that it will undermine economic growth? Because there are also arguments on the other side saying China seems to be the one, again, just like in 2008 during the financial crisis, that uses an approach which is widely criticized, but ultimately may help them to weather the crisis much better than other countries. And then we can also close with this. So anything else that you would like to say at the end of the event, of course, you are absolutely welcome to say it. Perhaps, Arie, you haven't spoken for a while. What do you think? Yeah. Are we heading for an economic turmoil, or are we going to recover very soon? China.
Well, I think that living in China for quite a long time, we all know and we witness that China is doing whatever is best for China. And sometimes it's not necessarily what's best for the individuals, and it might not be the best for the rest of the world, but China will take care of whatever they need to avoid turmoil and avoid instability. And that means, at least for the very least, is making sure that people are settled, people are healthy, people are fed. We witnessed some enormous growth of buying of food from other countries by China, just to make sure that there will be no shortage of anything that may create some instability. And I think that China is probably one of the few countries that can take whatever measures needed to create the conditions for the economy to thrive again. Many other countries will suffer and has to face elections, and they have to face all sorts of limitation. China doesn't have this limitation. They'll do whatever is needed to be done on the health side to make sure people are healthy, and on the economic side to make sure that China will recover. And it may take longer than they expected, but I believe it will happen because they have the power to do it.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I very much agree with Arie, actually. I think, well, seeing the problem for foreigners, there will be always a need for a foreign presence in China. So, look, talking about what the subject is for this discussion, I would say there will be always a need for foreigners. There will be always cooperation and coordination with foreign countries and China. There's a lot of cross national education programs. Many of these programs have been stopped currently, but they are scheduled to start again. I'm thinking about the British initiative, for example, to have 18,000 interns every year coming to China, and the same coming to the United States, to the United Kingdom. So this kind of program has temporarily stopped, but actually is going to continue in the future once the COVID situation is overcome. So I would say there will be always something more, some interactions. The question is, what will this based on? Will this be based on, as we had it before, people coming to China because there is a transfer of knowledge or a transfer of technology? Or is this something that is a cooperation where there is a win-win situation, and China is seeing foreign countries not just as a source of knowledge and technology or wealth, but also like a partner where they are able to give something back to their partners in order to create a win-win situation? For the moment, as I see it, there is this culture of the winner takes all in China. Like, okay, we need to conquer and establish ourselves, no matter. And just as Arie said, they do. I mean, China has its own interests as the main priority. Now, I would say, I hope really that there will be a shift of mindset, not just with the government, but also with Chinese companies and organizations, that actually what really gets people richer is a win-win situation where all your partners are getting rich, not just yourself.
Thank you very much. Zach.
Yeah, I'll tie them both together and connect also to the question. So the question was about, I think, mitigation versus elimination, which seems to be more the Chinese approach. So I think China wants to continue with the elimination approach and not to allow the virus in. And that actually means that if other countries go with mitigation, there would not be much travel between China and those countries, or at least there's going to be very heavy restrictions on those travels until we get to that promised day that when there's going to be a vaccine, and then everybody could realign along the same lines. And what's interesting is to see how, like, whether or not we're creating maybe a mini situation of China being isolated from the world, which is in itself isolated from itself to begin with. And what kind of winners and losers will we have financially around the world? And I think most in this panel seem to be on the opinion that China is going to be one of the winners, and I share that opinion as well. I think that China would come stronger. I think one of the challenges that we also discussed here was the challenge of xenophobia, both outside China and inside China, and between nations generally. And let's hope that, you know, that the world would be able to overcome this and find what unites us more than what divides us. I think as expats ourselves, we're on the side of that wants peoples of different countries to work well together, and I keep rooting for our team to win in that.
I think we all do.
Yeah.
And then with that, I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for everybody who joined us. There are a number of ways to continue this discussion. One of them is the LinkedIn group that I run. So I will invite all the panelists there, and many of the people who are attending the call, they are already there. So if you find my LinkedIn profile, then you will find my group, Intercultural Teams and Leaders. So any of the questions that you couldn't ask, because there was a handful of questions that we couldn't handle within the time frame, so please feel free to send it to the individual panelists or send it to us in the group, and I will make sure that we are going to continue. I'm also going to publish a recording of this online panel, so it is a good discussion point as well, and we will keep in touch about how that goes. And I would like to thank everybody again. I enjoyed myself immensely. I hope you did too, and I think we learned something. And I wish you a very great evening, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
It was a pleasure.
For the pleasure, yeah.
Budapest.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. We still have half of the day left here.
Yeah. Take care.